Welcome to Behind the Build. It's our first Roundtable series, and today I have with me an amazing panel of people. We're here to talk about the missing middle, and that the topic is being discussed in the beautiful Lutron studios here in Toronto, Canada. So we thank Lutron for hosting. We also have Sound Solutions as a amazing sponsor for the overall production. So we thank Sound Solutions for helping make this happen. I have an amazing panel. I have Chung from Studio JCI. I have Naama Blonder from Smart Density. I have Evan Saskin from Blue Lion Building, and I have Gabriel Fain from Gabriel Fain Architect. Thank you for joining. So, topic today, a hot topic has been a hot topic for a little while, and all of you know it very well. It is the missing middle. So I thought we would start off by talking about what is the missing middle. So I will open it to whoever feels like they want to respond. I don't like calling on someone first. So you can all decide who you'd like to dabble at this.
I can start with the professional. Yeah, of course.
Go for it, Naama.
The professional definition is, when you look back, right? Like we can talk about the middle in like income and demographics, but the professional definition is anything that relates in terms of height of the building between the single family houses that we see here and a mid-rise building that technically, again, the dry definition starts at 6 stories. So, and you look at the city, or the last time you flew anywhere, you can see that we don't have a lot of that. And that is because our planning framework did not allow to anything. You could demolish a single family house and just build a bigger one. But in terms of unit count, how many families actually living on a single property, that was simply not allowed. And it was just very recently, I think as back as 2019, that we said, okay, we should revisit that planning policy. So this is kind of the foundation of the planning framework of what the missing middle is.
Okay.
I think unit counts a really big part of it, right? Like as soon as you have more than one family, maybe more than 2 families living on a single lot, up to, I don't really know what that upper number is, whether it's 30 or 60, there's these different kind of petering out into more complicated building types. But it seems that that's the scale that Toronto has never been rich in. And certainly I think like not in our professional lives have we been building that housing density at scale.
Or at least I would say it's not like fully embraced. A triplex has been in the zoning bylaw for a long time, right? So that's not a new. You look at certain older, neighborhoods where there's this like 3-story apartment building in the middle of all these houses, like, around like Eglinton and Allen Road. But I do think unit count is important. And it really is just, to coin another term, gentle densification, right? How can we gently densify something that is predominantly like a single-family home zone to add more people, more density in a gentle and meaningful way versus looking at tall towers.
And why do we have a need for the missing middle? Like, what's wrong with the housing problem here in Toronto? Well, that's an easy lead in.
Well, one of the problems is you're talking about the unit count, is the unit types. Like we've been building shoeboxes for the last 10 years, which are not really designed for families. So now this missing middle scale, there's a shift towards building units that are more conducive to families so that families can actually afford to live, for example, in our older established neighborhoods in the city, which previously were dominated by single family dwellings. So this missing middle is a key scale shift that we have to move towards. I mean, we've been talking about it personally for almost a decade, and it's only now gaining a lot of traction with some of the distinguished people at this forum. So yeah,
I think there was a big shift in 2023 because even though triplexes and duplexes existed in the zoning bylaw beforehand, they were really constrained to the densest couple of neighborhoods in Toronto. And along sort of major, like secondary arterial, Eglinton and Allen Road and Bathurst and Shepherd. And there have been those kinds of apartment buildings, but not at scale, right? And then in correct me please, but 23, we get a multiplex bylaw that says every single piece of land in the city of Toronto that could have a house on it could also have up to a fourplex. Okay.
Okay, I hope the Ontario Planning Association not going to take my planning not license, but okay, because I might not get all the facts right, but let me try. I think you're right. We see existing, what we call the missing middle. You can go to even Rosedale, one of the most expensive neighborhoods. Everything right now is a heritage, but it exists. And you say, wow, that is actually so beautiful. We need more of that. I believe when in the 1997, in amalgamation, that was the point that they said no more. So every missing middle low-rise apartment, let's call it for what it is, low-rise apartment building that was there, it was existing from before. I'm trying to be very careful because I've been living in Toronto for almost only 11 years. So I might not know all the facts and history and all of that. So triplex, everything low-rise apartment was allowed and stopped being allowed until we said, let's, reopen it and approve it again. I think we need to be careful. I don't know what gentle density is. And I think it's a tricky term that we need to be careful because when some of us say gentle, I feel that a lot of the members of the public that object a lot of the intensification, and we're just a few days after sixplex was approved citywide, it's for them, they would say, oh, semi is the and I think our city needs so much more than a semi, so much more than just a triplex. To a matter of fact, I was opposing to the triplex and fourplex because for me, the city of Toronto needs so much more. It's really nice in Mississauga, but I was afraid that we will increase the value of our properties to such an extent that no one will be able to ever touch it again to do something that is more meaningful in future generations. So on the spectrum of gentle to triplexes, this is kind of where I land.
By the way, I think that we're allowed to have opinions. We can talk about these things, right? Like that's the whole purpose of this discussion.
I'm warming up. Just
No. I'm saying like from the regulatory bodies, like if you're watching this, then like just whatever. There's a conversation.
And I think that's an interesting point you brought up, Naama, is like, how do you define gentle? And I remember, a long time ago going to this committee of adjustment, and it's all within the context of whoever's hearing it. So if you're a single family homeowner who's lived in your area for 35 years, has seen very little change, suddenly putting like a triplex is a massive amount of densification. Whereas if you're coming from the other end of like, someone who's maybe more on the development stream wanting to bring more housing, 6 is like a drop in the bucket, really, when you think about it, right? Like it really isn't much depending on the framework and the context that you're looking at it. So you're right. It requires like understanding, what are the different viewpoints and how can we, provide like a common ground on what missing middle, what densification, what are the current needs and why, the whys of why is this such a hot topic right now? Right?
So one of the reasons that it's really desirable, I think, and like one of the, sometimes gentle is a dog whistle for like, doesn't look like an architect. It's got a sloped roof and it's the same height. Yeah. But ignoring that, I think the gentle part that really resonates with us, I think with like all the other cosmopolitan places in the world that we like and think of as forward-thinking cities, is that instead of having these isolated hyper-dense blocks and then this really diffused mat of housing, there's just like a little more density everywhere. Every school can accommodate one more family. Every sewer can accommodate 2 more toilets flushing, right? And so there's an incrementalism to it that doesn't address major housing crisis issues, but can just sort of like slowly, evenly distribute density a little bit here, a little bit there over time. And that feels really, I think it feels palatable to oppositional neighborhood groups sometimes because you're not inundating them with 100 new families. It's 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. But I think it's really appealing from a like municipal infrastructure perspective as well, because it's not a massive radical change to transportation and education and garbage pickup and all of these other services. It's gentle. And I think the problem is at some point you do create additional burdens, and you fail to address them because of this like there's something very Toronto about like, let's just do a little bit of it and maybe just a little bit more. And then we'll revisit that in 5 years and do a little bit more. And it is I don't know if it's right to call it a failure of imagination, but there is a sense of just like dipping a toe into density.
Yeah, see, I don't agree with the whole gentle idea. I think we need to take actually a quite extreme look at this, because if you look at the history of great cities, they were done with bold thinking. And like Evan is saying, it's going to take another 10 years, 15 years at this rate to get the kind of density that he's talking about, where you can actually have these kind of blocks that are fabric, like in European cities, where you don't have these side yard setbacks, you don't have these rear yard and front yard setbacks. Like, we're kind of on a crusade as architects, I think some of us here as well, like to try to change those planning rules. Right. Get rid of the side yard setbacks, get rid of, for example, on code changes, like get rid of the two exit requirements. So moving to a single stair, like there are all these planning and code changes that need to happen like literally today if we're going to be able to achieve great cities. Because I think at the pace we're going at, we're really slow and not going to get there.
Well, and it's funny too, because like when you think about when you go travel, admittedly I have not been to Europe, so I mean, sorry, but what I know of it is that you go and you walk these beautiful streets and you have these beautiful facades of these buildings that are 4 and 5 stories tall, and you feel like you're just walking through this warm, beautiful city, differently than what you experience here and in many other North American cities. Which is why I, in many ways, kind of agree with that. Not to take away from what you said, but let's just rip the Band-Aid off and let's go at this.
Well, because we still have a kind of suburban mentality to these multi-unit buildings where they're these objects within a lot rather than creating and stitching together these neighborhoods. So
can I ask, like, what do you say? And I know this is going to sound silly, but for those that are watching this, if you're living in a neighborhood and you're seeing some of this gentle densification happening, and you're complaining about, I'm going to start getting shade on my lawn and my grass won't grow and my flowers aren't going to have a chance. You know, I want to go sit in the backyard and take in the sun in the afternoon. So what do you say to all of that? You don't have to be shy about this either. Just say it.
No, they're not gonna like what I'm gonna say. And I've been called radical and extremist before. Oh, it's okay. It's a compliment, clearly. But no, because I believe that if you live steps away from the subway, it's inappropriate to have a single family house. Like it makes it a private transportation that costs us billions of dollars a year. And if you're not near transit, go and have your house with a backyard. The problem is not that only that we allow it, we also allow them and encourage them and empower them to object anything in a higher density near transit. So this is the problem with our planning framework. And I would also say, and I never crunch the numbers of how many people are actually expected, but there is this unbalanced, in my professional and personal opinion, that there is a conflict between a single family house near transit in a city that is Toronto. Okay, everything that I say is very Toronto specific. If you're going out to the suburbs, I do have another opinion. But as long as Toronto attracting immigrants and we want younger generation to see a future for themselves, housing is a major factor of that. And that ratio of a single family or 4 families on a single lot is a very that I never crunch the numbers, but something tells me that the math doesn't work.
Right.
And I don't believe in, and I don't think of next generation. Okay, not like, and that is a very planning thing to think in very long term. And it's not about 2020. Now we're 2025. It's not about 2030. How this city is going to be like for truly for our kids, and what housing options and at what price in relation to their income this city will offer. Because right now we think this is an affordability crisis. We've seen nothing yet in the trend that we're walking right now. So we need to zoom out, and I think that if someone will be brave about it and bold about crunching the numbers, they will see that it's not enough. And last week we saw how many plexes, how many permits. There were only 452 permits under the multiplex. 452 units is
In 24
equivalent,
months,
yeah,
right?
in 18 months. I believe the monitoring is 18 months.
Okay.
But it's equivalent to 2 30-story towers. 2 30-story towers. All of this mess and all of this fast for 2 towers, like unit count equivalent to 2 towers.
Yeah. Where are my kids going to live?
It's also a generational thing, because a lot of the times when you see these public meetings, who's coming out to oppose them is a different generation than the younger generation, who are usually actually at these public meetings supporting a lot of what we're doing. And I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of architecture that we're promoting as well. I think it's upon us to almost inform the public through good architecture how this housing can fit into these neighborhoods that have been protected for so many years.
And so what does that look like?
Like, I know going to these meetings, I'm solidly middle-aged. I feel like if there's somebody at a meeting who's younger than me, they're with almost absolute certainty there to support the proposal and encourage it to be denser. And if there's somebody there older than me, almost without exception, but delightfully occasional exceptions, are there to say that this project is too much, too bold, too much density, too much of a change from our protected heritage. And I don't think that it's specifically an opposite. Like, when I started doing this 15 years ago, it was like, this is modern architecture and that's somehow immoral. I think that has left public discourse, maybe for good, and has been replaced by this fear that my home is the most valuable thing that I've owned. And although I've never necessarily received the wealth of that in cash, I know that my home it's like single family homes are increasingly scarce and expensive. And that's my savings, that's my estate, that's my wealth, and you're eroding that. It says this opposition that I don't agree with.
But who in Ontario in the last 30 years had to worry about the value of their property? And I want to propose a new law, actually on Thursday, to say if you cannot afford your house today, you don't have the right to speak. That's the law I wanted to bring forward, because so many of them wouldn't be able to afford. So there should be some level of empathy. Sorry, I interrupted you.
This is fine. I like it. You just reach into the fridge, grab some hot sauce, and play it.
Yeah.
The framework here is that, I mean, there's things that fall out, like if you can afford your house now, then you can afford your house now. Feels a little problematic. Like,
Oh, yeah.
are we advocating for the expropriation of people who could? Are we pushing for expropriation of land in order to create mass housing projects in this framework?
No.
Or, okay.
Just
The right to oppose. This felt like a COVID era thing that I liked, like specifically in the minor variance process, where once upon a time, you're like, I'd like to build a 3-story house. And then your 3-story neighbors say, no, this has always been a 2-story house. And you're like, well, that's not even a variance. Why are we fighting here? But you would lose. And then sometime in the pivot to online, it felt like the members got a little bit bolder, where they would say, excuse me, Mr. Opposing Neighbor, can we just put this person's house on a screen also? Okay, you have a 3-story building with a window on the rear. You can already look into this backyard. What exactly is the issue here? And I think it started to swing a little bit back of late. Now that we're meeting in person again in City Hall, it sometimes feels like the loudest person is the person who's able to garner the support of the committee. But that pivot to onlineiness, I think, brought a little more planning rationale and objectivity. I guess if we're advocating for the radical elimination of processes, I think there should be no minor variance process for constructing specifically missing middle housing. I have a project where we're building a triplex just off Eglinton, which is about to be one day a transit thoroughfare. And
we'll see if it happens before this airs.
Or before the project's built, or yes. But we met with planning staff in July of last year, and they said, make this little change here, and we support this project. I think we should have been empowered at that point to go get a building permit 30 days later. But instead, we then had to get in a queue to schedule a hearing, which was subject to a bureaucratic error, which led to the rescheduling of the hearing, which was further rescheduled due to a Canada Post strike. This sort of like, and we pulled our permit last week, a year later, 11 months later. So it does feel like maybe that level of more detached professional engagement without a large public hearing process where the loudest person gets their way could be a simplification of the approval process to encourage more housing.
Yeah, and also there's a disconnect between like the political rhetoric, even at the federal level, and the reality of building. Because on one hand, they're saying modular, wood, local, but you actually can't build these multiplexes completely out of wood, which makes no sense. So how do you have on one hand the politicians saying, you know, we need to build these a certain way, but you actually can't do that?
Because they have to say what works for the masses in some way without actually having to think through what they're saying makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that brings up the whole other question of why is it even missing? Like we call it the missing middle. What is it that's missing? And there's so many different facets of what's missing. There's the planning policy, and that is changing, you know, the 4-plex, the 6-plex. But just because the planning policy changes, it doesn't mean there's adoption, right? There's so many other parts of this ecosystem that's missing, right? There's the market. You know, if you try to do a multiplex condo, that isn't in the ecosystem of buyers yet, not en masse, right? So to buy a condo that's in a 3-story or 4-story, you know, ground-based development is not as, like you kind of think on one end, yes, of course it's a product.
Yeah, and it makes sense.
But it's hard. It's hard to get condominium registration. And the whole process of condominium registration for like a small 3, 4, 5-plex is very different and much more onerous per unit than it would be for like a 400-unit thing. You know, I've kind of done a little bit of an investigation just on our projects, right? And, you know, we've been fortunate enough to have like single family, urban infill, mid-rise, and high-rise. And, you know, I kind of, like there's the pro forma aspect of the missing middle is what's missing, right? Really penciling out like realistic numbers to construct something and to sell something at a certain price that matches any affordability criteria or any saleability criteria. So, you know, we kind of looked at, you know, some of the projects over the course of JCI, and, you know, to do like a single family home, 2 years maybe, right, to start to finish, right? Depends, you know, it's a very like passion project. It's usually like the homeowner and, you know, whether you go to committee of adjustment or not. To go to like a triplex or a 4-plex, you know, so that's like, say like 2 years for 1 suite. To go to like a triplex, you're looking at about like 6 or 7 years for like 3 or 4 suites.
I'm going to push back because this is all that I've done since 2011 is design and build multiplexes on pieces of land that I own and had to subsequently condominiumize them and sell them to end users. So we've got, I don't know, 50, 60 units in Toronto that are occupied by people that we've sold them to that they own now, that are condo multiplexes, duplexes, triplexes. And I find the approval process, construction timelines, construction costs are really comparable to single family numbers, assuming engagement with the minor variance process, yeah? And the dream of 2023 is that it would actually get easier, that there would be bylaws that would allow you to not even need to engage in minor variances, really. And that has not generally, but occasionally does prove true. On the absorption side, like I guess I want to push back on the idea that there's a cultural lack of interest in buying a thing like that, because I think it is site specific. I mean, that's just sort of a classic real estate adage, but we're finding that the units that we can create, which are like, let's call them 1,200 to 2,500 square foot units, 3 and 4 bedroom house-like grade accessed units are selling at prices that are like 90%, 85% of a house in that neighborhood. And far be it from me to call that affordable in the year 2025 or 2015 for that matter, but it's a housing type that's less expensive, that feels like a house in a neighborhood. And this gets to the piece that's been really exciting for us. Like, architecturally, I think they're wonderful, right? Compared to, compared to the kinds of things that you get to design in much higher density buildings, I think there's a level of craft and care and individuality and personality and things that that we, like our team, have been able to figure out in those kinds of multiplexes that I found really, you're working with much more entrenched construction systems and like bylaws when you're building much larger buildings. So it feels like there should be more room for creativity, individuality, expression in that model. To perfectly agree with you, though, that pro forma has gotten worse every single year in the past decade. We've seen land prices go up and up and up, and we find that the end prices haven't really gone up in the same way. You've got to be very responsive to the market there. The build costs have, of course, gone up tremendously in the past decade, and the approval timelines have lengthened out. So,
and I think that was the biggest point that I wanted to make, was the approval times, right? Because, when I started looking at like, okay, how long does it take to build a unit? Like, let's just talk about a unit, right? We started looking at like, sort of the missing middle, the mid-rise. When you're doing about like a condo tower, say like 400 units, 14, 18, it's 5 days per unit of planning time. Like, that's, because you've got the bulk and the density. When you go to like a mid-rise, so let's say you're even just going for like a 30 unit. So something a little bit more like, it's about 30 days per unit. So, whether, and, it can be anywhere from like, actually, no, the mid-rise was, I think, 50, mid-rise was 30 days per unit, and that's about like 80 to 120 units, right? Then you go down one more scale to like, sort of what is more like a missing middle type of thing. And that ends up being like 80 to 100 days per unit, right? And so when you think about it, like if you actually just think about it in years, like the amount of time spent to develop the missing middle is what's, I think, missing, because you don't reap the benefit. Like, time is money, right? And the amount of time you have to go for committee, or depending on the size of the development, SPA, like thank goodness that got wiped for some of it. But, there are still, like if we want to talk about like the major roads, there are still some, development sizes that do require SPA, right? And the minute you trigger SPA, well, that's a whole other, time suck in the development process. So I think to address what's missing, there really needs to be a compression on the time frame required, because that's an important part of a pro forma that we can't ignore.
I want to just to bring it, even like what you say, to break it down, I'll give it a concrete example, even under the missing middle, in any of the plexes, okay? For example, I look at major streets, which we can talk about it, but I will need a parking variance, like what, 9 out of 10, if not 9.5 out of 10. So even if with all the good intention that the city has, and I can hear any planner in the city here listening to us and say, hey, what does she want? We made it as of right. There's no site plan under 10. I don't know, other things. But if I need a parking variance, it means that I still need to go to the committee, and the neighbors could come and potentially just object the variance. They cannot object anything that is as of right, but they could still object the parking, which means that I still have the timeline, and I still have the objection, and I still have everything. So kudos to the city, and I think all of us agree that the city has made a tremendous progress, but there's still those things that we just have to go to the committee for, and perhaps what Evan suggested is that staff could, I don't know, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but
go ahead.
But like,
agree with the words you're about to put in my mouth.
yeah, that staff should have the ability and authority to approve these variances that are purely technical, so we can get going.
Right.
And other Ontario municipalities have so designated this authority to their staff.
Really, which ones?
Kitchener, Waterloo allows their everything in Kitchener, but and other Canadian municipalities as well have allowed their. I mean, the chief planner has the authority to award variances that are minor. There's this idea that you have to engage in a public consultation process, but that doesn't have to be a public hearing with a committee. It could be a posting of a notice and a 28-day period for people to respond to it. There's a number of ways to satisfy that.
I wasn't aware of that, but I never had a committee of adjustment hearing in Kitchener. So.
What I find so interesting about this personally is like you think of the next generation of homeowners coming from the current generation that is so vehemently against the intensification in their areas. Like I just recently saw. I live in Leaside, and there's I don't log into it often, but every now and again I do. And I went onto our Facebook forum for the Leaside area, and people are complaining about the intensification projects that are coming to the area. And this person, to the question that I asked before, complained about shade. And I went at the response by saying, well, where is your child going to live? If you're going to stay where you are, your wealth is now tied inside of your home. So where are they going to get the money to be able to afford their next place?
Waterloo.
Kitchener, Waterloo, right? Yeah, right. But like, what's the solution if the capital is tied to that property? They're going to have to come to you because they can't afford the rent because there aren't enough rentals, and they can't afford to buy anything because there's just not enough product.
And as much as Kitchener is awesome, Kitchener is not Toronto.
Correct.
And my heart breaks. Well, you know what? I don't hear about many young couples moving to Kitchener, but I do hear about many of them buying a suburban house in Markham and Richmond Hill. I would say higher numbers, perhaps. You know, buying a second car or two cars because they just left downtown, and that breaks my heart.
It's a failure of urbanism.
That does break my heart.
Whitby,
yeah.
Oshawa, like people are going outside of Toronto to be able to find something that's going to be affordable.
And unless it is your dream to live in a suburban, no sidewalk, no, I would argue. I think it's...
Can frame it in positive terms, maybe. I think missing middle housing encourages a kind of dense, urban, cosmopolitan culture that you would want in the biggest city in the country.
You get community. Like that's
Which is us, yeah.
To me, what blows my mind about all of this is that so many people that are trying to wholeheartedly squash the opportunity for furthering developing a community that they grew up in. Like when they were young, they were growing up, basements weren't really utilized, right? People were out on their front lawns. They were like, there were bikes outside. You knew where people were. And nowadays, it's the exact opposite of that. You go into small pockets of Toronto where there's, instead of like the beautiful large homes that we build, you have, small semi-detached homes. And you have these beautiful areas where the kids are outside and they're running up and down the street, and parents are coming together and they're having a conversation about work or about life or about the kids, whatever it is. When you start to fulfill the missing middle in these areas, like that starts to come back, and you can regain a lot of, I know that this is kind of whatever, but you regain a lot of what was lost during the course of COVID, which is like the social abilities that people are still trying to come back from.
Affordability is a huge part of that as well, right? Like I find all of the neighborhoods where we brought our kids home from the hospital and all these things were where there's a strong sense of community fabric is because there's like a variety of different ages of people at different life phases that are living together in one neighborhood. Like I think that maybe it's a very Canadian ideal, but like that diversity is the thing that builds that kind of community, right? And it's, I do think, a thing that missing middle housing models can help solve by virtue of being incrementally more affordable than the rest of the housing stock in their neighborhood. You're trading off density for a version of affordability.
Well, and you're also in many ways then also going to be helping small businesses, because as the intensification happens, now the market that existed at the corner store can still exist and not go out
No,
of.
they don't see it. Though.
I mean, let's just
You don't
talk about
see-
the
you don't see that?
construction side of it then.
Not me, them. They come to committee and object.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't see it. What you just said, they don't see
They
it.
don't see it. No, they don't understand it, because you have the large box store that you've got to drive to get to, instead of.
Well, and that's where like our planning policies are not there yet to allow for example, retail and laneways. Like, why don't we have that? Why don't we have retail in some of our neighborhoods? Or why don't we look at European found middle, because it's already existing there, and look at courtyard typologies and understand how they have a communal kind of condition, because they have these courtyard buildings where you have much narrower buildings rather than our longer buildings. So you have better units there. You have through units, so you have cross ventilation. Like, we're not building really great units here. I'm sorry. Like, we're kind of part of it too, because our templates are based on the planning policies. So like the planning policies don't allow for the creation of really great neighborhoods. All we have to do is look in the textbooks or just take a plane to Europe and look at how courtyard blocks are designed. Like, they're so smart. They already have the solution. I don't know why we're still complaining here and figuring it out. I don't even know why we're talking
Gabriel,
about
you brought up a very apt point earlier about, like, really right now the way we're trying to address missing middle is by taking a suburban form and densifying it. Versus, you know, when we reference any sort of European city, there was a policy in place of this is what it will be. And, you know, remember, like, once upon a time, Yonge and Eglinton was the end of the line, right? Anything north of Eglinton was farmland, right? And then it kind of moved up to Shepherd and then to Finch. And so, you know, you're going from like what was predetermined as an urban fabric of downtown Toronto to like Yonge and Eglinton, where suddenly then that was once upon a time rural, is now becoming like suburban and then incrementally growing. So I guess my question for everybody is that even the right approach to try to densify a suburban framework and context in still a sort of suburban typology? Or, as I think someone mentioned earlier, just rip off the Band-Aid. Let's just call like this residential street and a typically residential detached, and just completely redefine the policy of what you can do on a street like that. I'd be curious to get your thoughts.
I mean, there are streets in Yonge and Eglinton with 27 boarded up houses and 2 more that aren't quite there yet. So I think that process, like, I think there's damage that comes to the urban fabric from wholesale erasure of history also, right? I think part of the complexity, but like joy of being an architect and a builder in any kind of urban setting is you just have to deal with the stuff that you're up against. And maybe that's part of the cosmopolitanness that we like in cities, is that you got to get along with all this other stuff happening around you too. So I think the only constraints on that model are capital. And I'm skeptical of the capital that would say, let's erase this entirely. Like to your earlier point about the inefficiency of we can design this many units in 3 days per unit and that many units in 30 days per unit. Sometimes, I mean, I guess the reason I'm a builder and an architect is because I couldn't make a living as an architect only designing those other things. But the flip side of it is like I also could not have gotten a toe in as a builder at that scale. I can't build $30 million buildings, but I could build a lot of $1 million buildings, more than 30 of them. And by doing that, there is, of course, an inefficiency, but there's also a real engagement with mom and pop businesses as electricians and carpenters and drywallers and plumbers. And it seems like that's money that really stays in the community in a really positive way. So I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that we have to, I mean, Young and Eglinton is a very specific intersection, but I think that in most increasingly densified over the past 20, 30 years neighborhoods, I'm still pretty okay with the idea that we're going to densify lots one at a time. Would I like the side yard setbacks to be tighter? I would. Would I like the building height to be like more permissive? Like I would. Would I like the unit counts to increase? Yeah, I would like all of the constraints on what we decide to build to be determined by forces that aren't planning related. I feel like the market and capital and construction logistics and health and safety and physics can be and what the market wants can be the constraints on what kind of housing we build. And planning defines an envelope bigger than that you can never fully efficiently occupy. But in terms of like, would I wish for the erasure of historical lotting fabric of the city that doesn't allow certain building types? Like, I'm not really advocating for that much of an erasure.
Yeah, I mean, I partly agree with that because like we're coming across existing buildings that the city kind of forces us to keep a lot of these walls, right, to maintain these setbacks. And it's not great housing stock. Like some of the buildings from the 50s are pretty awful to keep. So I do partly agree with this idea of just erasing, demolishing.
I know one of your projects around the corner from me.
Sorry.
That's about,
I thought Impossible Toronto.
No, I was going to say that's about to go wipe out a series of townhomes.
Yeah, and that's not great housing stock there.
Because they're visually
horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, they're awful. So see you later. I want to see this tower go up. I can't wait for it. It's like
well,
it's
you
actually
have to wait probably
a couple of years. Yeah, I know.
But in older historic neighborhoods, I think, for example, in the annex, like that's like a perfect area for the missing middle because 100 years ago, like we were looking at these buildings from 1912 that were 8-plexes. And they're like remarkably designed. They're like beautiful. They're like masterpieces of architecture. And if we can kind of keep those and build similar kind of buildings next to it, then you're starting to create this energy and these neighborhoods that are for more people at the scale.
Naama, you were going to say something.
I have so many things to say. You mentioned the annex. And there's the Annex Residents Association of, like, I don't know how many of you. Yeah. So, no, because I had a project over the missing middle. They put the two existing buildings under heritage in full, and there was nothing there left to work with after that. And I think to your vision, I think the practical challenge is that the multiple ownerships, right, which is an obvious thing to say. But I was also excited about major streets because we talked so far only about the multiplexes, but the major streets are referring to streets like Dufferin, Lansdowne, right? Yeah. The streets that you would assume that should have intensification like Bloor and College, but because Bloor and College are designated mixed use and Dufferin and Lansdowne and Bayview are designated neighborhoods, part of the missing middle, are not, still have only single family houses. So now the city said you can build up to 6 stories, 60 units. I would still argue that it's under appeal as we record this. It's under appeal, so I don't know. But I still argue that I will need a variance, at least for parking, for each and every one of them. So we'll see how that goes. But it will still require, and that's why I'm so excited about that vision because it pushes it to 6 stories, to much more significant. So let's see, let's see how that will turn around. But
but there are definitely challenges, still, right? And I think that's where, this question of, well, why is it missing, right? I love that 6-story, and I absolutely, support that. But there are other things that just make it challenging. And I think that's the challenge with the missing middle, right? When you break into 4 stories, you need to provide a standpipe, You need to provide an elevator. Standpipe, at least $100,000 plus. Elevators, at least like 150 to 250. And so when you think about like the return on that cost over a 4-story, it's not even worth it, right? You might as well just stick to 3-story, not deal with
Part 9.
you know, exactly, right? 6 stories gets a little bit better, but then it's also
So you're actually bringing up a topic that to be very honest, like keeps me up at night, is that right now the condo market as we know it, as the towers and the mid-rise, is in non-existence, right?
Yeah.
And when I hear from developers, I hear a much longer term than you would even think, okay? Hint, not 2 years, okay?
Yeah.
And and I wonder, because I believe that something eventually gotta give, and I wonder what it will be. And I wonder if it's construction cost. We're so focusing on the planning, and I wonder if it's construction cost of land. Developers are, I think, at least the ones that I've met, are smart. And since this crisis has started, I've been looking up to them to see how do they pivot? What is the creativity that they're bringing to the market? A lot of them are like rental. I believe rental is just, it's not a real shift. I believe they're doing it to keep the light on. I am not a developer. I'll be very humble here in my assumptions, but I don't believe that our typical condo developers are capable of just switching to rental when it requires such a different mindset, different capital, upfront capital. And I wonder, now we're sitting in 2025, and this is bigger than the missing middle, but maybe the missing middle is the answer to my question. What's gonna go? What's
But I like
the
what
future
you're
be?
saying about creativity, because I think that's where architects come in. Like, we're trying to build light frame wood buildings, 6 stories, which I was trying to find some examples to figure out how to do these drawing sets. Yeah, in Toronto. Like, we're building one, we're starting in a month on Dundas, and everything's built out of wood. The cores are wood, the stairs are wood. Like, we as architects have to push and experiment and test so that we can figure out
there's a foundation for
how to
something
build
that
these.
works.
And 6 stories is tricky. It doesn't really work. The numbers don't work. You have to push it to 8 stories to make the numbers work. Now you can't build out of wood. You can't build out of wood.
Out of
Light frame wood, which I know. And I think for me, the ideal is to build out of 2x6s, 2x4s. That's where it's.
So you are saying construction costs. Like, if I'm translating what you're saying, you're taking that to construction costs.
Yeah, because once you switch to mass timber, it's a whole different ballgame, you know? And you can do the same with light frame wood. Mass timber is glued 2x4s, right? Which I have a question about all the glue used in CLT. So that's why I'm big on light frame wood construction, because that's how we should be building. It's the simplest way. That's how we used to build every, mid-rise building in the city.
But you're building less 100 years ago, and you're building with Douglas fir 100 years ago.
Right.
Which was just a better overall wood.
Structural standards exist. We have the capabilities to test lumber and demand.
Are you saying that there are structural engineers that can be involved in these
Or
things?
just that there's grading systems that exist for lumber's capacity. I think to this day in the Pacific Northwest specifically, like in cities, in American cities, you'll find 6-story wood stick-built buildings with multiple units in them.
Yeah. It's quite common. We're looking at Utah. That's how they build there. Wood light frame buildings. It's not even a question. Here, I don't know, maybe someone at this table has seen a light frame building at that scale, but I think that's where we can get it to a point where we can build a lot of these. We have the templates, we have the know-how to do it. And then that's where costs can come down, I think.
We've been skeptical of factory prefabrication of building elements just because they seem cost prohibitive. And then at a certain point, everyone's really excited until they're like, oh, and it comes on the back of a truck, so it needs to be in these increments. And you're like, that doesn't play nicely with my structural grid, and it doesn't play nicely with my loading fabric, and it doesn't play nicely with my code requirements. Like none of these things, they bump into each other in really expensive and inefficient ways.
And to most sites in the city, you can't bring the crane, you get a permit, they can't fit in from the laneway. So these are.
I would love to see a prefabrication model that actually is cost effective, right? Because they front end sell you on like you're going to save this much in time. You know, it's all like constructed in a controlled environment, and you'll just like erect in like 5 days or 8 days. But then there's still all the other complexities that that exist, right? And that prefabrication model is only specific for a certain type of form. If you're doing just a extruded box, great. You know, the minute you introduce like a mid-rise with angular plane or anything like unique, like those, it's the wrong product for the form. So I think it really is a marrying of like, if prefabrication is a thing that's going to like move the needle in terms of construction costs, you really need to be mindful of what is the form. You will never do a pitched roof house prefabricated. Never will happen. You're going to have like a 3-story, 4-story flat roof extruded box, which then begs the question, what do we want these missing middle streets to look like, right?
That's what I wanted to ask is how. So,
No.
So I want, like, what does it look like now? You if you're going to go ahead and implement what we're talking about, and you're not going to go and offend everybody that's going to go look at this in the neighborhood, how do you assess the best way of making the exterior of these buildings and what they're going to look like? What how do you play with that?
Well, that's the fun part.
I mean, yeah. Like what we do, like for example, on Dundas and the Junction is kind of look at the other buildings from history, like see how their brick coursing was done, see all the details, like try to draw inspiration from that. Don't just kind of randomly put things together, understand what is the kind of neighborhood feel and character and put that into a building. Like the challenge now is, for me, I want to build in brick. Like I think that's the kind of way that we should be building Toronto. And it's hard, like on a 6-story building, to do it out of wood, and then now you're putting brick up, then you need a whole lot of steel. So there's a kind of conflict there on how we want the buildings to look and how we want the buildings to be constructed. So then you're ending up with metal panel or EFIS, and then it gives that feel that people I think are highly critical of, that they're not buildings that fit in with the neighborhood fabric, or at least the historic fabric. So that's a challenge for architects that, you know, I'm going to the wood prefab plant and talking to them. Like that's part of our project now, is to really go there and talk to the people and figure out how to build like with brick, with wood. We're trying to find thinner bricks. We're bringing bricks actually from Belgium a lot of the times.
From Europe, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we used to have bricks in Toronto, and now we don't have a lot of bricks here for some reason. Like, but that's a challenge. So thin bricks. So we have to kind of play with the materials and figure it out.
Have you gone the other way? Can you just build with structural bricks?
Like a double
Like a
brick?
I
I mean, that would be interesting. But then we also don't have the masons and the trades now to be able to do that kind of brickwork.
I think we do. We just don't have necessarily the appetite to pay for it.
That's where I was going to go with that. Is that they're there. Yeah. There's just a cost to having them do it.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot.
And that's what and that's what it costs to do things right.
Yeah.
But then is it affordable?
Only if there's 60 plus of...
Sure, like, you know, like we could all design like $2 million homes, but really we're not addressing the affordability, right? And I do think, you know, I think to address the missing middle, it is actually a bit of an inflection of the creativity, the appetite to try and change things that might come from like the lower, the smaller scale development side. But I do think it needs to marry with understanding some of the metrics from the high density side, because they've got it down to a science, right? And in the end, they all have to work, right? Like, we have to address the right housing type. We have to create the right neighborhoods. But it also has to be a product that in this day and age has to be affordable to some degree, or less expensive, or attainable, or however you want to call it. And so I do think there is an opportunity for this sort of inflection between understanding, how do the high density, developers do it? What metrics are important? Because we can't forget that. But at the same time, how do we build and develop a community that evolves and grows as transit expands, right? So, hopefully one day along Eglinton, there'll be a whole other typology that develops, right? Just like along, the Young Corridor, typologies have evolved. And I think that's the interesting sort of challenge for us as architects and builders and planners, is to, forward think, what could this look like, and how could this improve the neighborhood in the end? Because in the end, density does improve neighborhoods. It creates communities. I think about all those like wartime bungalows, like those really tiny, 3 bedrooms. But like, when you think about it at that time, the nuclear family size was larger, right? It was a 3-bedroom, tiny 800 square foot house that housed like 4 to 6 people, right? And now you're looking at, a house that's like 2,400 square feet that houses 3, right? A mom, a dad, and like a single child. And so, we talk about like how much more like people are added to the streets. Well, the nature, the social conditions of the family size has changed, right? From like the 50s and the 60s. And I think, really kind of taking into account not just like the planning policies, not just the constructability, not just like the saleability, but also what are the social dimensions that we need to take into consideration as these areas evolve.
Do you think we have a professional responsibility to tell the public that they need to live with less if this is going to work? Yes, I think we do.
Deep down inside, I'm like, yeah, like just, but, social culture is a very tricky thing.
Sure,
right?
but you have an authority,
Yeah.
not but like a voice and an ability to sit in rooms and say to people who make decisions about what kind of housing to create that, because the thing about, I have a lot of criticisms of the high density development industry, having been actively involved in it for a long time. I think decision-making processes are entirely based on replicating things that worked once before. I think in Toronto specifically, they spent a decade plus misunderstanding what the market was telling them, because there was this sort of financializing of condominiums to the point where the people purchasing them weren't the people living in them, but the builders only need to communicate with the people purchasing them. Then it's somebody else's problem. And then you get this like greater idiot problem where everyone buys one thinking I can eventually flip it to someone less informed than me for more money. And eventually that collapses. So I don't think of it as an industry of the most, of the people taking the deepest look towards the furthest horizons. And so I do wonder if as architects, there's maybe responsibility is not exactly the right term, but like an opportunity to advocate for housing more people with a little bit
There
less.
is, but I would say as professionals or service advisors, if I were to talk to a developer, I can absolutely give my 2 cents, but I don't have skin in the game, right? And I think, what some of them do have is a little bit more understanding on the social context of things. Like, we live in a day and age now where 2 bedrooms are the ideal unit type. And 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Why? It's not for a family. It's because we live in an affordability crisis where it's going to be 2 roommates living together, and so they need their own bathroom, right? That has changed fundamentally from what a 2-bedroom used to be, which was a family, right? And so there is, I think we do have at least, it would be wise to have an awareness of the social cultures and what has changed, right? Because how can we design for something we don't know, right? Can we advocate? Absolutely. But, it's different now. It's not the 2000s, it's not the 70s, right?
But I want to propose an answer to Evan's question. Because first of all, advocacy, yes, I will literally say that I built my business based on advocacy, and that attracts the clients advocacy became part of my marketing, because that attracts the type of clients that believe in what I say, and that's also working so great because the clients who don't believe in what I say don't call me. But I would say that the answer to your question is that it will make it affordable, and I will speak to myself. I bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo to raise my own family in downtown Toronto, and I always give that comparison that my best friend and I were looking for a new home in the same time. Both of us were looking for a 3-bed, 2-bath. She eventually, yes, we're still friends, although I am shaming her almost on every opportunity that we have. She's still my friend, I know. She's not in the industry. So she doesn't know how many times I tell that story. But, and she bought eventually in Vaughan, and had to buy a second car. We don't have a car, and she eventually even paid 20% more than what we paid, which usually people would not assume that will be the case. But I will say here that and the trade-off, of course, just to be clear, mine is much, much smaller unit. Yes. So here's the trade-off. I wanted to make that trade-off, and to your question, I am the example that uses less. Mm-hmm. I do have a storage unit, but we're very, very cautious about what we are bringing into the house, what is garbage, and it's better not coming here because I don't have the space for it. We use less, and that was because that was what it was. I don't want to say affordable, but attainable to my family. So I think people will be able to use less if the units that they need, we will still be able to give them what they need. And I will argue, and that I was working on the Growing Up's design guidelines, which is to introduce family-friendly units in higher unit count developments. For the city said, 2 and 3 bedrooms are the family units. For me, I was still new to the country when I was there. I'm coming from across the ocean, where 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms are very much the norm to live in an apartment of 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms. And it was kind of a cultural shock to me to hear the city and authority to say 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, that's all you can ask for. And I'm not blaming the city. Look at the market. There 4 condos, are not good luck finding one. So I think it's a natural outcome of a process of what do you think you want. You're looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Mm-hmm. Okay, here it is. It's not going to be a 2,000 square feet in downtown Toronto. It's going to be much. It's going to be half. But here it is. Everything you need, we took care of. And if the stroller you can put in your unit, we put a storage in, a very dark spot in the building that will be, or, whatever. That, for me, is going to be the natural outcome if those units were enough of them.
I have also lived in 2,000 square feet with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms with 3 kids and 2 dogs. And it is not perfectly, ideally comfortable at every life event and every moment of every day. In some ways, you need other pieces of the community and the city to be part of your home to make that work. But I feel like that's part of the big picture of what we're advocating for here. That is better for the city if we all do that and have 1,000 square feet less in each of our individual homes.
No one would care what's better for the city if it comes on their own comfort. Our job in the industry is to make it also so much better for them, because they can use transit and they don't need to commute and spend 2 hours a day without seeing their children, and their children have to come back from after school program at 6 p.m. and they won't see them. The whole point of of the 15-minute city, whatever you want to call it, walkability, proximability, is that it will be so much better to your quality of life that you will look at your friends in Markham living in a double the space that you have, and I don't want to say feel sorry, but like think that your life arrangement is better.
The reality is also that you come to become comfortable with what you know. And so if you've always grown up, or you grew up in a home that was larger and you had space, you don't necessarily want to have less space because you can fill space, right?
But the missing middle thing, specifically the multiplex thing, and the major street 10, 20, 60 unit building model, I think creates opportunities to create a size that isn't prevalent in the market, right? There's so many 6, 7, 800 square foot units. There's so many 3, 5, 6,000 square foot houses. There's a lot of middles that are missing, and one of them is the 1,500 to 2,500 square foot unit, an amount of square footage that, were I advocating to the public, I might say you can really comfortably live in for your life through different phases. At some points, it will feel crowded. At other points, it'll feel spacious. But over the decades, the timeline that our buildings ought to be built in anticipation of people happily living in them for, it can really work for you. And I think that it's a sort of narrative that we can be putting forward to people who are ultimately making decisions, is whether it's, in this building mass, we could have 3 less units and it would work for this demographic, or we could have, it's up to us to see the possibilities. And I think we have a sufficiently elevated view here, or an abstract enough view of the bylaws and the regulations as a whole to say there are additional opportunities that haven't historically existed in this city. And I mean, look, you convened this panel of people who have real depth of experience and perspective of where we think the near future is going here, certainly from a regulatory perspective. And there ought to be, nobody here is saying Toronto has figured out all the housing models that Toronto needs and now we just need to make more of them. That's definitely not the answer. The models that will help us have not yet been constructed.
Yeah, and I think it's up to architects and people in the planning community, especially like Naama, who put out documents showing and illustrating what this kind of vision could be. Because right now, the public generally doesn't hear architects and planners on TV or social media mostly.
Well, so hopefully you're hearing this.
No, and also the documentation and the illustration of what the city that we all want is usually done by the city. So it's not really, I'm sorry to say, that great in terms of architectural, quality. And it's usually kind of one building here and there they show in an illustration of what this, what these unit types, what these buildings look like. So I think it's up to architects to put out literature to show and visualize the future. We're kind of stepping back into the side of our practice and doing these research projects that are funded by, different organizations to illustrate this kind of model. I know Naama is doing that a lot as well. But I think that's important for us too, to not only build, but also write and illustrate and visualize.
So we agree prefabrication probably doesn't work for most of the things that we want to be building most of the time in cities.
Well, I would say it's challenging. I'm not going to say it doesn't work.
I haven't yet found a way for it to work for me, but maybe other people have.
No, I'm just saying the Prime Minister ran on it for his campaign, so I hope some smart people advised him.
And the last time that I spoke on a podcast, I got contacted by the Federal Finance Ministry who hipped me to this fact that is terrifying of an efficiency gap in our industry, whereby the number of hours of labor that go into creating a housing unit has tripled since the year 2000. Not a massive regulatory change causing that, not driven by capital. This is just labors of hour per housing unit. This is the country as a whole. And they don't know why, and every industry's done it, and construction is the worst. one response to that is prefabrication, which maybe has limited applicability in urban situations. But the other approach that's really interesting is there a way to streamline and like prefabricate the approval process where there could just be a set of drawings? I saw somebody present this at a forum recently where you could look up a site on the city's map, every site, and here's a zoning envelope that's allowed as of right. And subsequently, there could be, the CMHC put out this catalog of housing types regionally, right? Here's a set of floor plans. Pay some number of hundreds of dollars, theoretically, and you could download your building permit.
You know what?
Yeah.
What my problem was with the catalog?
Yeah.
And I
want this.
Disclaimer is I'm the architect, so obviously I'm more sensitive to be offended by this catalog. We are not the problem, not cost-wise, not like, and we're here sitting, speaking of like, do you know the chief planner now has a new role that they open for making the city more beautiful, like the beautiful city director something. So I would argue that taking the architect role, by all means, I know the fees, we are not the problem.
Oh, yeah.
And in the process as a whole, I mean, and you said it yourself, you weren't able to make a living as an architect, so we all know that.
I build also to make up the
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Still an
Like
architect.
that's the reason I don't do a plexus, because when I tried and when the laneway was started approved, I got the feeling that the mentality is that people think they're building a shed and they're not willing to understand why the architectural fees and what gets into it. So I stepped away from working with non-professional builders. That was a decision that I made. Somehow my name stuck with the missing middle, and I'm happy to be here because as we said, I advocate for these things. The catalog is shedding the light on not the biggest problem. I'm sorry, and it's going to create, like, let's say if it will be a massive success, it's just going to create kind of, typologies that all look the same, and for what? To save. And by the way, we all know that there are so many site-specific problems that a plan from a catalog could not predict it. So that's. But what you say, you started your question so beautifully and just ended it off the cliff. But the approval process could be smarter, could be more efficient.
just not via the catalog.
But even I still think, to Sujan's point, that there are still things that are missing. On Thursday, we're here on Monday. Thursday, sixplex was approved. I actually wanted to ask you, because it was approved without increasing the envelope, meaning what are we going to get? Smaller units. The other thing that it was...
just watch Evan's head go like this.
Yeah. So, and the second thing, they didn't increase the DC, the development charges waiver, to match the sixplex. So now you can build...
short-sighted.
What a beautiful way to kill your own policy. What a beautiful way to kill a sixplex. Fiveplex, you don't need to pay. Sixplex, you need to pay all six.
$500,000.
So who's going to
deal.
build a sixplex? And they put a bedroom cap because councillors were putting... saying that all of these plexes is just rooming housing in disguise. Rooming housing, multi-tenant, basically rented by the room, that I think in an affordability crisis, who are we, honestly, who are we to say that this is inappropriate? So now there's a bedroom cap. Sixplex is approved with DC of all 6 units and did not increase the envelope because, God forbid, it has to look like a house. So you're talking about the streamlining the approval. Like, we still have, we're still not there on so many other fronts.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist by nature, but it does seem like by design, the federal, provincial, and municipal policies to encourage housing just like perfectly don't align. And I feel like we've built a career out of being like somehow in this incredible multi-dimensional Venn diagram, there's like a sliver of a cool piece of architecture and we want to build it. But it's an incredible frustration to
Up
see
until
them.
very recently, like Abdur from your team, right? Like there was 4plex plus a laneway suite. Again, I'm not. You will be able to speak to it way better. It's not my scale, but to get CMHC funding, you need 5 units. Yeah. But in Toronto, to build, you weren't be able. No, they fixed it. Again, kudos to the city. On Thursday, they fixed it. You can now do it. But for how many years? you had a fourplex, had to leave the permit open, right? Build the laneway. Maybe you should speak to it because
Yeah,
I really don't know.
I think,
or you, but
I think to the point.
and not getting CMHC funding if you don't do
You
it.
couldn't build the laneway while you're building the fourplex, which makes no sense. You need to build them at the same time. You have all the machinery there. You have all the people there.
You're
like
gonna come in behind. You're like
you need
half
to
building
dig a
the
trench to
infrastructure.
connect all the
It's
services.
going to be just a couple people just walking along the side yard. That's why the side yard setback exists.
Casting some spells. And
I mean, it all goes down to, again, like the ecosystem is missing.
Yeah.
Right? The infrastructure of the ecosystem is missing. You know, you've got these weird like approvals that are actually shooting yourself in the foot. You've got, you know, planning policies that are being enforced from one level of government that just provide slowdowns on other tiers of government. Like, I don't know what happened to Bill 109, but like that was, you know, intended to build things faster. And what did it do? It just like all the municipalities just started finding other ways to slow it down. And really, like that's, I think, the biggest. I agree with Naama. It's not the architecture that's like the slowest part, right? We do have a professional obligation to be creative. And I agree, like the
But
CMHC.
we all know why they made the bedroom cap and they're not increasing the unit, because they are councillors out there that are putting a real threat on getting the sixplex was approved on planning and housing, but it still needs to go to council. And there's a real risk that that will not pass because we have councillors that say, I'm sorry, there are elections next year. My residents do not want anything to change, right? Like we know that quote. Why is it my responsibility to pass it? So we all know, I don't want to sit here and like, you know, poop all over the city because they're putting the bedroom cap and exactly for that reasons, to make a political compromise. And we all know that we're here in this housing crisis to begin with because housing in the city is just political. And they're making this political compromise to satisfy some councillors saying, oh, don't worry, we put a bedroom cap.
I think the best thing that happened to council was when the number of members got cut in half. And
That's not how they felt.
Yeah, I was going to say, there are a couple there that this
Did
severance
not
wasn't
like
enough.
it.
I'm not saying they didn't get, I wouldn't have picked specifically that half, but like there's a real impediment to development there. And I do think that they don't see it that way. I think one of the great things about cutting council in half is that like the socioeconomic range of every ward has broadened significantly so that you can no longer be a councillor for a very narrow demographic. I understand the arguments about the number of people per councillor are the highest in Canada, but you just don't need that number of people in administration. It seems.
I want to ask this: if you were to go out there and you were to go sit on a corner in a neighborhood, I want to try to use this as a kind of a wrap to the discussion. And you, instead of having a lemonade stand, you had an "Ask Me Anything" sign, and it was about this topic. What would you want to promote to the local neighborhood about the importance of this topic for them, so they can understand it and rationalize it in a way they potentially haven't, in a way that we might not have touched on so far in the conversation, or perhaps to heighten what we've already discussed in the conversation? I kind of work my way around.
Well, in that neighborhood, there would be a cafe at the corner so that you can actually have this discussion rather than just a unit that's, you know, for a single family. So you'd have that kind of use. You'd have mixed use neighborhoods. So you can even have this conversation, a forum for discussion. And you tell people that would be this, but better, like your neighborhood, but it would probably be a lot better because you'd have kids playing in the street, in the laneway. Like where I live, the laneway is, yes, there's cars there, but there's a lot of kids playing ball hockey. They're playing basketball. They're going to school. Like it's a vibrant kind of energetic.
No, so they're off their screens.
They're off their screens. So we can have this, but it'll be a hell of a lot better too. That's what I would say.
So when I started doing this work in 2011, this kind of multiplex development, I met with a lot of neighbors. I met with a lot of counselors. I met with a lot of community association groups. We were going to committee of adjustment. And so I would sit down with groups of people opposing our developments. And this is 2011, 12, 13. So their multiplex bylaws don't exist. In a number of neighborhoods, multiplexes aren't even permitted uses. And so I've listened to a lot of the destabilizing, and frequently we would go to committee and then lose and go through appeal processes. And there's always good planning arguments for what we're trying to do. So we would generally be successful at those and build them. And it's interesting that in the decades since, the councillors are totally on board. The planning staff, the people who are planners employed by the City of Toronto, are, I would say, 100% on board. It has been a complete about-face in a decade. The community associations screamed about the perceived damage and harm, and I think are now very clear that that never happened. It did not come to pass. Whatever harm they feared, the change happened.
Oh, sorry.
Whatever they were scared of, it's been a decade. There's been 3 families living on that lot. Ownership has changed 2 or 3 times. No harm came. And so I think it's like a poison that you need to suck out. You need to be there to absorb the criticism and say, let me walk you through what actually happened. We've done this. We've been there on the front line. What are you scared of? Let's talk it through. It's really not that bad.
I had my birthday last week. And thank you. And I think I've learned, and maybe it's an age thing, that's why I'm mentioning my birthday, that I am not capable of making everyone happy. And there's a limit. And remember, what you're describing, it's on a case-by-case basis. But when you have dozens of those cases, it really affects. I'll put it very simple. I don't want to deal with that.
I lost many nights of sleep, anxiety, all that to deal with these communities.
And I'm not sure it's on the architect or the plan. I don't know whose responsibility that is. And that's why I said, I wish housing was less political. So we will find ourselves less in those irrelevant discussions. And I have my fair share of how many stories it's just you're here at the committee arguing something that is not even a variance. It's just why are we here? You're costing taxpayers money right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, and maybe you're asking me this in a question of in a point of time that I've had my, I've had enough. I tried. Maybe it's not the optimistic perspective that people usually get out of me. I am a very, very optimistic person. I think we have a very big problem with how housing works in this, that councillors only see, as I said, 2026 is going to be election years. How much do you think more housing bills are going to be approved between June and June 2026, June 2025 and June 2026? Not many. I think we have a problem, and I do my best. I do my best with my design. I do my best with the way I speak to the public. But I don't know if the solution is going to be just professionals doing their best job. I think it's so much bigger than that.
I think for me, I would not want a lemonade stand. I would want a milk box. And it's really kind of piggybacking or continuing that stream. What I would want to talk about is the importance of embracing change and considering the future generations behind us. I think a lot of what Stonewalls things is, this is my thing that I've had for the last 30, 50 years, and the inability to embrace change. The understanding of where we are in this, world and in this context, and the importance of creating a sustainable community that is beneficial to everybody, right? Demystifying, intensification as a bad thing, and just really promoting all the positive benefits, whether it's aging in place, whether it's communities, whether it's different types of housing stock that's available. I think that's what I would be more interested in. We all have our various, professional obligations, and there are ways that we can bring impact to society. But really, I think what comes to the crux of it, whether you're a counselor, whether you're a homeowner, whether you're a developer, whether you're a policymaker, is the ability to embrace change, to the ability to evolve, but really the future thinking of who's the generation after us and how can we leave a legacy that will improve their livelihoods.
As you say all of this, I just had this visual, in some residential areas, they have the people that come around with the bell for knife sharpening. Mm-hmm. So I was just thinking you have like a flatbed with a bunch of kids sitting on a bench and a couple of you, and we go around and saying, where am I going to live? Thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. If you've been watching this and you want to contact anyone here, please feel free. I'll provide contact information. I appreciate all of you being part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.